So, moving on to the next, I use this, the stool up here. We've been discussing the subject of responsible gaming now for quite a bit. This would be a good moment to look at the practical implementation of responsible gaming in an online gaming environment. With us today we have Janny Wierda, Director of Security at Holland Casino. We remotely have Francesco Rodano, Chief Policy Officer at Playtech, and Simo Dragicevic, CEO of BetBuddy. You may remember Francesco from the breakfast briefing we had here on the 17th of December. Janny, Francesco, and Simo, let's hear from you. Janny, please come to the stage.
Well, dear audience, online and offline, it looks like omni-channel gaming already. I'm giving the kick-off for the presentation with Francesco from Playtech and from Simo from Playtech. And we want to show you the way we have to go for the change of responsible gaming, land-based in a good manner for online. The situation here looks already a little bit like the new market. Online and land-based. Two channels to deal with. Difficult to stay in control for Willem and his crew. But I think till this moment they did a good job. Thanks Willem for having us here, online and offline again. As Holland Casino, we are willing to go to the online market, and the market will be open the 1st of March next year, we hope. Planning is to do this with Playtech. The new legislation will also give us some challenges, and I will talk about it this later. We want to start our presentation with 3 questions on the poll, which you can see on your app and your mobile phone.
Have prepared a poll with Janny. And also the people who watch this remotely, please go to the Slido app. You can point your camera to the QR code on the screen and you go straight to Slido. You need to enter the event code hashtag GIH to participate in this poll. The first poll question was?
The first question is, will customers in the Dutch gambling market be better protected than in the other European markets?
So please take a moment to enter the Slido app. Again, you can point to your camera. If you're here in Amsterdam, you also have on your badge with your name, you have the QR code of Slido, and if you point to that, you get straight to the Slido app. Bear with us, Simo and Francesco. So we're getting in some answers here.
Yeah, I think that the most answers are for a yes, but still a lot for a no. It's still a little bit moving.
Yeah, so let's give this another 10 seconds.
Yeah, we can do so. Well, I can hope that the Dutch gambling, that the Dutch gamblers are the most protected in Europe. But well, not all the audience think that. But I think with our legislation we will have that. We go to the next question. Should consumers be forced to surrender some of their privacy rights?
So again, please, if you could, in the Slido app, you see the poll tab. If you click that, you see this question popping up. And if you just pick one of the 3 answers, yes or no, it's quite easy. Should consumers be forced to give up some of their privacy so as to be better protected? So, excuse me, profiled for player protection purposes? Again, we have answers coming in. And I guess also the remote viewers are adding their answers here. That's great.
Yeah, so also more than 60% says that we have to use, I think, more data, because online we will use a lot of data for profiling our customers, and the audience says, well, that's a good thing. That's not a good thing.
Great, so that was quite clear.
Yeah, and then the next question: can stakeholders trust industry to use data and technology in an ethical and fair manner?
Exactly, that's the 3rd question, the last question. So please point your QR code if you don't have Slido yet. If not, go to the Q&A tab, the poll tab, and pick an answer to your liking, yes or no. I think some good coming through. Well, let's give it a few seconds, but I guess the outline is clear, Janny.
Yeah, and I think that the outcome is that 60%, more than 60% says yes. So that's good that the industry can be trusted to do to handle it, to deal in a safe way with the data they get. Okay, and this was a discussion we had in the preparation of this presentation with Simo and with Francesco. So some of the answers, some of the discussion will come back in our presentation. And after the presentations, we have time to answer some questions and to discuss something about that. And this will be also, you can see that on Slido. We start the presentation with Francesco. He will show us an overview of the market. And we will end with Simo, who gives us an overview of the opportunities we have. And I'm in between to tell something about the challenges of Holland Casino, to translate our responsible gaming policy into a new policy also for the online market. So I give the word to Tom Francesco. I will, if you say next slide, I will put them for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Janny. Thank you, Willem, for having me. Yeah, it's been 9 months since last time, and unfortunately, I'm stuck since there, so I would have loved to be there. And given the restrictions just announced by the British government today, it will take some time before we can move again. Anyway, I'd like to start my overview, indeed, from Amsterdam, from what I presented 9 months ago at the Gaming in Holland breakfast briefing. And then after, I would like to build on that, just to introduce the topic of our joint presentation. And by the way, thanks Janny and Robin for doing this together with us. And the topic is how retail and online can inspire each other, help each other, so to help improve the respective responsible gaming practices. So next slide, please. Okay, this is what I presented 9 months ago. It's the way I see national gambling markets evolve over time. They usually start with a monopoly or oligopoly that's managed by state lotteries or state companies. Not yet, Janny, please.
No, back.
Previous one. Okay, this one. And then policymakers realized that this is not efficient, as a large part of gambling still happens offshore, and they start opening the market. Then, of course, no one gets everything right on the first try, so there are other rounds of regulations. The framework gets improved, and because the channeling rate also improves, the size of the legal market can grow. And then it grows so much that gambling becomes really visible. Think of advertising, or think of the betting shops in the streets, or the gaming machine halls. And with gambling becoming ubiquitous, and because media like bad stories, this is a very dangerous mix. And then the media attention grows and grows around gambling, and this fuels a negative sentiment among the population, especially those who are not gamblers, who, by the way, are the majority. As a reaction, the governments to this negative sentiment start to introduce restrictions, and then the industry must react in turn and comply with those restrictions, usually in a very passive way. So the challenge is how to break this vicious circle, how to change things so to prevent this negative reaction from the wider society. Next slide, please. Okay, after thinking of that model, I also tried to see the real data in the 2 most mature gambling markets in Europe or in the world. And as you can see, that are Italy and the UK. As you can see, there's indeed some similarity. Next, please. And about that, actually, the turning point when the backlash kicked in was 2019, so even before we knew what COVID-19 was. And then here, just as an example, I tried to put other countries on this curve. More or less, every country can be put somewhere on that curve. Next, please. Okay, this Now I'll give a few examples of backlash on the media. This is the slide that I also presented 9 months ago, and that because I think it summarizes the common sentiment today around gambling, and that's that headline: "Gambling destroys lives." And also it says government should take action. That when this article was published 2 years ago, it was actually quite prophetic, and more on this shortly. Next, please. Then a few other examples across Europe. This is Belgium, where a group of self-help stating that the regulation is too relaxed. Next. Germany, where a story of an accountant addicted to gambling that stole 1.4 million euros. Next, please. Sweden. It says gambling advertising is a trap for those addicted. This one is in Greece. It says 1 in 10 students has issues with gambling, are problem gamblers. Next. And this is also interesting because there's people in the streets in Madrid protesting vocally against the betting shops, because there are many betting shops. Again, a lot of visibility, backlash. Next, please. And then let's see a few examples of reactions of the government. This is Spain. A few days after the protests in the streets, the municipality of Madrid decided to block or to suspend the opening of new betting shops. Next, please. And then all the other countries that I mentioned with the headlines in the papers. And about UK, when the headline said the government should take action, and just yesterday the UK government announced that they will be directly involved. By directly, I mean Boris Johnson himself, into the review of the Gambling Act. And then there's Belgium, Germany, Sweden, Greece, and Spain, where other federal restrictions are being introduced right now. And then, apart from UK, all the other countries actually hadn't reached the maturity in terms of regulation. So what's changing now is that these restrictions, these government interventions are kicking in before the maturity of the market. Next, please. So, of course, governments have every right to introduce restrictions in gambling. But the issue maybe is, are those restrictions, do those restrictions achieve the goal they are meant for, which is to better protect players? The issue, in my opinion, is that we are all different. So if you take 2 gamblers which have been diagnosed with the very same scores in terms of addiction, they might exhibit completely different symptoms. While the tendency at the moment is for government, and it's been mentioned before, is to introduce restrictions that are really simple, binary. We call them one size fits all. Examples, they were mentioned by Arian, who called them stupid. There's deposit limits or spending limits or advertising ban. But my question is, if a measure is effective to protect one of those 2 players, is there a risk that the other players will be instead forced or pushed offshore, to gamble offshore, to avoid the restrictions, where there is no protection at all? Next, please. So, Janny will tell you shortly how important it is in the retail casino to actually see the players in person, in action, to understand if something wrong is going on, and in case intervene. I think there's a sort of psychology, the ability of reading people's minds in that. And this seems to be challenging to do online. But then think of this. There's a computer program developed by Facebook that a few months ago learned how to read the minds of professional humans, poker players who are humans, learned to call their bluff, and this software also learned how to bluff itself. So maybe there's a way for AI to help us in the spotting problematic behaviors in gambling online. Next, please. And this is something that, in my opinion, the Dutch policymakers seem to have understood quite well. These are some provisions in the upcoming regulations, and they are centered around the analysis of behaviors of players, so to spot at an early stage possible risks. And that's not just it. Next, please. There's another element that I think makes the perspective in the Dutch gambling market promising. When an operator becomes more responsible, it risks to lose money. And this is an example in Finland. Is that money that's generated by players that shouldn't gamble? But then, next, last slide, please. There's a big difference in the Netherlands. Because of this, of the reliable actor clause, Holland is like a blank sheet of paper. All the newly licensed operators will start from scratch, so there are no existing revenue at risk. So hopefully, this will allow maybe a less spectacular growth rate of the legal market, but at least in a more sustainable and backlash-proof way. And then I will hand it over to Simo, to Janny and Simo, who will tell you how Holland Casino and Playtech are working to make all of this happen. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Francesco, for the overview. Most of you will know the law and policy of the responsible gaming in the Netherlands. I will explain it in line with the policy of Holland Casino. So you see on the slide, there will be a clear distinction between on and offline. Cannibalization land-based is higher than 95%, together with the arcades and the lotteries. The expectation of cannibalization online will be around 80%, earlier mentioned by other speakers this day. Playing land-based is on a controlled level. Online can be with different providers at the same time, with no limits. Online is open 24/7. Less control on game speed. More possibilities on multiplayer online. No checks and balances on the floor with online gambling by observing the player. Impossible to see if the player is drunk or is coming from a vulnerable group, or if there are other multi-problems. There are also opportunities, of course, and Simo will tell you more about it later. As Holland Casino, we have a long history of experience with responsible gaming, and we are always looking for innovation of that. The branch, our industry, sometimes I think it's a little bit old-fashioned, but I hope that the solutions for responsible gaming will be more modern, and I think that the online world will help us with that. Dealing with data, also in line with responsible gaming, will help us to protect our customers better. Our staff is trained in recognizing problem behavior, also in dealing with different conversation. The way of conversation is in line with the face of the player. I will show you later. Our responsible gaming department is specialized and independent of the operation. We have a visitor registration system and also an incident management system. We can combine these two for our policy of responsible gaming. So we can monitor our players. We have additional measures for vulnerable groups as young adults. And we use a combination of objective and subjective data from which we can think it is proportional, in line with the GDPR and the ethics discussion. There's always the trade-off between the responsibility of the player and the responsibility of Holland Casino. For this, we use the direct intervention model. It is old, and I think that I'm not sure that Peter Remmers invented it years and years ago, but still I think it's a good base for a stepped care policy. Most of you will know the schedule, because I've shown it before, I think, in other presentations. The player starts to play and learn to play in the first 2 phases. And most of our players will stay in this state, as you can see on the next slide. For some of them, a losing phase is following. In the phase of prevention interview can help and change the behavior of the player. If we not succeed in stopping the player from excessive play, there is a risk for entering the critical phase or the addiction phase. Now our prevention measures are out of order. Influencing will be more difficult, and I think that there is a time to go to the health care institutions for real help. If you see the next slide, and I always say that I call it the playing field, and I think that the good thing is that the biggest part is green. Awareness and self-recognition is for most of our customers enough. If you go outside the lines in yellow, orange and red, our responsible gambling measures are in place. For the green field, interventions are not necessary. For the lines, tailor-made decisions are in our pocket. The content of these slides are important because the opinion from stakeholders is that every player is in danger, and that is not based on reality. Most of our players are having fun. The responsible gaming policy is influenced by the public debate at this moment. As you can see on my next slide, and also mentioned this morning, the public opinion about responsible gaming and about our industry is very negative. In the COA discussion, then before the decision of the COA, there was a lot of focus from the politics on responsible gambling. But also, and that's where we have to deal with now, there's a lot of focus on data privacy. It looks that these teams are fighting with each other. We have a gaming authority, but also a data authority. Which one will win this fight? It looks like that we are in between. The proportionality is leaving the green field for protection. Use of data for this group is not based on any goal, but use of data for protection of the players on the lines, the yellow, the orange and the red, is proportionate enough. They are the ones that have to be protected. Registration is the base for knowing your customer, not only for responsible gaming, but also for AML. Online, we also have to deal with AML. Dus all the measures we are taking now for registration, we also have to do it with, online. For arcades, this is still under investigation. Registration is also necessary for CRUX, our national exclusion system. In the line with above information, I will add again that we have a history of responsible gaming. We have our behavioral analysis based on what we see and what we hear. That's what we have in the land-based industry. The signals of our employees. We have our face-to-face intervention based on the seriousness of the face of the player. We can see multi-problems, cross-addiction or psychological problems, vulnerable people. We can see the social interaction or social circle. How is that online? I will show you some examples. Face-to-face, valuable information. How do we get this same level online? Emotional regulation. How are we going to do this online? Social interaction. Monitoring appearance. Multi-problem players. I think that we saw this picture almost for the same before. So a lot of challenges because this is the way our responsible gaming policy works, and we have to translate it on the same level for the online world. So challenges enough, but I think also opportunities. And the opportunities will be by the use of data. But only by leaving the players in our green field out of scope. And I think that's also the matter with online gaming. These players only need tools for self-regulation. I think that Cam gave us some examples for that. And hopeful cooperation with the gaming authority and the data authority. So which data can we use and is allowed to use for having a good responsible gambling policy. Our branch will not stuck in the middle. For the opportunities, I will give the presentation over to Simo, and who will tell you more about the opportunities for the online gaming market. And hopefully that we will have that also in March next year.
Thank you, Janny, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Willem, for the opportunity to join the conference. Shame I can't be there. I'm here in the UK, in London, from my home office. But I'm going to build on what Janny was speaking about earlier. But before I get into that, let me just introduce to you Playtech Protect. So at Playtech, we are looking at responsible gambling from a very holistic perspective. So our offerings are covering the core gaming platform. We have some very interesting partnerships with specialists around KYC and fraud. We have some fantastic tools around real-time personalized engagement. BetBuddy is our AI platform for detecting risk, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. We have a dedicated R&D team. We're really, in many aspects, just scratching the surface in this area, and also linking everything together with customer service and support. We have that layer on top. So this is really what we're trying to do at Playtech in terms of partnering with our licensees, with industry to try and advance responsible gambling. Please, Janny, next slide. So what I want to do is, I guess we've had some very interesting discussions around specific areas. It'd be nice to look at the sort of the big picture of harms and problem gambling, and I want to look at really what are those determinants of harm, and how can retail and online work to better understand that. And it's a very complex phenomenon. You can't just look at one thing. We have to understand the player and his or her circumstances and bios, psycho and social background, the product itself, the environments. That will be a big talk, big emphasis of this discussion, and also how that turns into risky play patterns, risky outcomes and harms. So looking at all of these together, I think gives us a good understanding of where those opportunities are, where we can learn from retail, but also where there are some advantages in online as well, and how we can bring the two together. Next slide, please, Janny. So if we look at retail, for example, there are some advantages, and Janny has talked about a lot of these. Let me just, I just want to make the slide a bit bigger. Very hard for me to read the actual slide on the presentation, but if we think about the player, the KYC process, understanding the player, getting to know the player when they register is a key advantage in land that we don't have to the same extent in online. The product, Janny mentioned things like speed, playing multiple products, availability 24/7 in the land-based environment, you can control that more, and the place as well. That does still give opportunities where land-based is registered play, where you know your player, where they have to have a loyalty card. You can assess risky play patterns and risky outcomes, and you can have a good understanding of player harms. And if you please move on, Janny. If we look at the advantages of online, what you have specifically are more. Is that the next slide? Sorry, Janny, did we? Oh, sorry. There we go. Thank you. If we look at, and actually this is the advantages of online, not land-based. There's a slight error in the typo. We can as well understand the player through the KYC process quite well. But if you think about some of those advantages, specifically in around understanding how people behave with the devices and when they play, there is an advantage there in terms of being able to capture specific data around sessions, around behaviors and patterns, and ultimately the data-rich environments of online play gives some advantages that may not necessarily be available in the land-based. And we're going to go into a few of those in a bit more detail. Please, Janny, next slide. So I want to look at player, product, place, etc. from an online perspective and show some examples of practices or best practices that we are applying in different jurisdictions around the world to see how they can be added to the newly regulated market of the Netherlands to raise standards in consumer protection. And as well as those 6 areas, I want to touch as well at the end upon ethics as well, and what it means to be to have the privilege of using data. What does that mean? Even when we try and apply it to consumer protection, what are the risks there as well? Next slide, please. So if we think about the player as well from an online perspective, we have a very good opportunity now to capture documentation and data with the onboarding process. And some of the e-commerce or digital first businesses are really doing this very elegantly and very well. And the online industry is now catching up. So the ability to verify players, who they are, their age, and even things when we talk about affordability, being able to upload information with regards to income, etc. And the opportunity that open banking, the ability to seamlessly share data between financial services institutions and gaming companies offers us a really rich opportunity to get to know the customer on sign-up. But also, next slide, please, Janny. Things do change, and one of the opportunities we do have with online gambling, particularly here, I'm showing you an example of one type of questionnaire that we can send to our players, is to ask them how they feel about their gambling. So once they've already been onboarded, once you already have that information, you can still, based on those risky play patterns that we can detect, we can regularly communicate with our players in real time on the online channel, see if they're enjoying their gaming, and then we can redirect them to a different outcome, and we can really control the player journey, whether that's to a different resource or to someone in customer services to talk to them. So whilst land-based does have absolute advantages, the online industry and technological advances, and specifically the ability to share data with APIs and communicate, is giving the online an opportunity to bridge that gap, and that's something that we are seeing as best practice. Next slide, please, Janny. Product focus is becoming increasingly important from a regulatory perspective, particularly online. And most of I've been working in this space for the last decade, and when I started in 2010, and for most of that time, the focus has been on the player and understanding behaviors and harms. But now there is a shift towards product, and we are beginning to see more industry efforts to try and make products safer. And an example in the United Kingdom, where I'm based, I head up a game design working group, which was initially set up by the Gambling Commission, the regulator, but now is being run by the Betting and Gaming Council, the trade body for the industry in the UK. And we're designing a code of conduct which is looking at leveling speed, so having a higher minimum speed, increased player controls, removing things such as functionality on games that encourage illusion of control, such as stopping the reels on slots, working on best practice on not celebrating things like wins below the stake, etc. So these are opportunities, I think, for online to try and plug some of the gaps, I guess, in terms of product safety. And if you show the next slide, please, Janny. One of the examples that we've worked on this year in the UK is on product labeling. So let's take slots, for example. If you think about the cost of play or cost of entertainment of slots, they're typically it's a function of how much you stake over the long run and the RTP, the return to player of the slot. But in the short term, things like the volatility of the game can have a big impact on the cost of play. So we launched a pilot to educate players on the difference between high, medium, and lower volatility slots. And I think this was a great success. We had over 70% of players who were questionnaire with this trial in the UK, who found this type of information helped them get more enjoyment and make better decisions around the type of games they play. So here's an opportunity, I think, on online to really push informed choice and help players pick the right entertainment experience, when the actual opportunity, hundreds and thousands of slots, can be quite vast and people can make the wrong decisions. Next slide, please, Janny. So specifically with regards to the channel or the place, there are risks with online, but there are strategies that regulators and policymakers can have, and industry can have from a self-regulation perspective to mitigate those, ranging from facilitating awareness for all players to very specific controls. And if you show the next slide, please, Janny, the type of tools that are available are things like making the choice architecture, how people play online, designed in a user-friendly way so that they can get access to the responsible gambling tools seamlessly, and education, to offering choices for players such as pre-commitments, whether that's choice or actually whether it's actually mandatory, as it is in some regulations, to actually the point where you remove some features of online gambling which you could argue are risky. If you look at some of the recent examples in the United Kingdom, removing of credit card payments of accounts, and also more recently with COVID-19, and it will become a regulation, is the removal of the ability to cancel or reverse a withdrawal once you've requested that. So there are specific levers that industry and regulators have to make online safer. Next slide, please, Janny. Now, in terms of risky play patterns, there really is a good advantage here. So what I'm showing you here is an example of a player profile in the BetBuddy system. What we can do quite seamlessly and automatically for every player is really understand the behaviors around deposits, around withdrawals, session times when people start and play, how much they win and lose, how they engage with RG tools, what time of day or night that they play, and also some very highly engineered behaviors, accelerating behaviors, chasing losses and wins, very erratic behaviors, and also focusing in on specific behaviors around people who play specific verticals. We know that the way people engage with sports betting is different to the way people engage with casino, is different to the way people engage with bingo, and whatnot. And also, given the debate around GDPR and data and privacy, the use of demographic data can be very helpful as well from a profiling perspective for online gambling. So a really good opportunity here to protect customers. Next slide, please, Janny. And if we think about what we can do with the data through personalization, through personalized risk profiles, what we can do is we can target those conversations so that they can be very relevant to that player at that point. Just like Janny gave a really good example of the direct communications that can happen in the casino. Here, for example, if you look at the next example, rather than going up to the player and telling them to take a break if you feel that they're spending too much time at the machine, you can try and interrupt their play with, oh, sorry, that's my pet dog, bear with me. Okay, go on, Louis. He's usually very quiet. He decides to bark in the middle of my presentation. Apologies for that. But the example that I showed you there was around taking a break from a machine and giving people I guess an incentive to have a coffee break when they're playing too much on a machine. So even though you cannot replicate the value of a face-to-face interaction as you can in the physical casino, what you can do with data, with risk profiles, with real-time communications, is channel those personalized communications online so that you can try to replicate the type of service and intervention you can do in retail. And I think we're beginning to make some really interesting progress in these areas through not only systems like BetBuddy and their capabilities, but also the APIs that allow us to exchange the data seamlessly between different operator systems. Next slide, please, Janny. Having said all of that, and we talk about analytics and AI, and we talk about how accurate it can be. It's really meaningless unless what you're doing is having an effect. So unless you can actually measure what you're doing, you can have the most accurate AI system in the world that can detect players. Unless you can intervene, change the player experience and modify their behaviors, you won't be meeting your licensing conditions, and you won't be reducing harm, which is a key objective of all regulated markets. It's not just to contain harm, but we want to reduce it as well. So being able to not only assess risk, communicate with players, but also assess whether they're effective or not, so that you can monitor and revise, just as Janny presented with the step care model. Unless you have that place with your solutions and processes, I believe there's going to be a big gap, and we won't be able to plug that gap with retail. Next slide, please, Janny. So to come to a conclusion, I wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking a little bit about ethics, use of data and AI. And in the past few years, there's been a huge focus on GDPR, and it's really been around protecting people's privacy and protecting their data. And there are some interesting elements to that as well, which are relevant to what we're talking about today. Things like profiling, for example, so being able to get a right for an explanation for automated decisions. So having that capability in your RG processes and systems is important. But I think the debate going forward, maybe that was the last 10 years, maybe the debate in the next 10 years will be around, are we using the data in an ethical and fair manner? Are we knowingly, or even it doesn't really matter, knowingly or unknowingly exploiting customers? Are we contravening law and human rights? And here the discussion around algorithmic bias and fairness and transparency and reporting, I think, will become increasingly important. We're beginning to see some of the major PLCs in gambling begin to, at their sort of semi-annual and annual investor days and reports, talk about RG metrics, number of self-exclusions, number of interactions. But going forwards, I think the focus on data around consumer protection in the industry will only increase. Algorithmic bias and fairness is a really interesting area, and I want to just spend the last couple of minutes talking a little bit about that. So next slide, please, Janny. So this is an area, me as a researcher and our team, we take a lot of interest. I guess the last 5 years, we focus a lot on explainable AI and publish a lot in that space. I guess our focus going forwards is around fairness in algorithms and detecting and minimizing bias. I wanted to give you one example. So you may have read about the Goldman Sachs Apple Card that was released a year or two ago. Goldman Sachs made a lot of effort to try and remove sensitive characteristics from the models that they developed to try to assess what limits to apply to those cards. Well, actually, it didn't really matter, because even though they were saying, well, we'll remove race or gender from the algorithms, the actual bias itself is inherent in the historical data which is used to train those models itself. This is a very interesting and complex area that I think will get much more attention from regulators in the coming months and years, especially at an EU level. There's a lot of activity around algorithmic fairness and bias at the EU level. So one of the recent studies that we've undertaken was around looking at whether we can detect gender bias in algorithms. And without going into the detail, and I appreciate there isn't a lot you can read on the right other than you can sort of maybe read the title of the paper, but one of the solutions that we've come up with is to, rather than relying on single algorithms to detect risk, is to look at using blind separate models. So actually training separate models with different genders and then pushing your data through both models and using the best outcome of both. And what we found actually in the first experiment was that you could reduce the difference in the true positive rate of detection for males and females with this method. You could imagine, sort of ethically, you could say that I have a very accurate algorithm and it detects risk at a particularly good level. But what if it's detecting men at a more accurate level than females? Are you offering a fair experience to all your customers, and are you contravening human rights? So a really big area of interest for us. I'm sure there'll be many opportunities to talk about it later. Just to wrap up, finally, thank you, Janny, last slide. So really, I did start with a long list of bullets for takeaways, but really, I think we've covered all the key points. What I wanted to say was I think there's a really good opportunity for the land-based sector and the online sector to really team up, learn from each other, what are the best practices, and try and not only apply those in the iGaming market, but come up with new standards. what is it around retail that we can learn, that we could try and apply with the technology and data that we have today. And I think if we do this, if we have this collaborative mindset and team up, we have a fantastic opportunity to develop a sustainable and successful iGaming market in the Netherlands. So that's me. Thank you to everyone, and I'll hand back over to Janny to wrap up.
Okay, so I hope that in line with all the three of our presentations, you can see all that there are a lot of opportunities to deal together with online and land-based responsible gaming, and also with the use of data. I think that the way of that is invented for the online gaming, the protection of the players, that's very worthwhile also to use it for the land-based situation. But it will be very difficult. Which data do we have to use, and which data is allowed us, can we use and is allowed for us to use, because of the discussion between our gaming authority and our, how do you call it, the AP, Autoriteit Persoonsgegevens. So it will be a nice discussion with them. We're already in the middle of it because we have a discussion with the gaming authority. They says, well, you have to have more objective criteria, and we said, well, yeah, but some of them are going into the privacy of our customers. And we also know that for the COA discussion, the Autoriteit Persoonsgegevens told us that it was too much for the protection of our players. So we're in the middle of that discussion, but I hope that we can grow into our responsible gaming with the data and together with the online gaming market, and we will still be the best in the Netherlands, and for the Netherlands, and also to protect our gamblers in the Netherlands for the best. As we saw in the poll already, we are very happy with that, and the audience also. So I think we have to stay in a high level with us. So this will be it, I think. Are we going now into the questions, or?
Definitely.
And then you are the boss again about this.
No. So I guess I need your help pointing some of these questions.
It's going on.
To you or your colleagues. So please stay here, Janny.
I can read them there.
And Francesco and Simo, please stay here. We still have a good 10-12 minutes left. Again, you can add your questions to the Slido app, whether you're online or here in the room. And we also have a question from the audience. I think Geert will first take an audience question here, Simo and Francesco. And then we move to the online questions. Can you please state your name?
Yes, Arjen Korsens. I have a question for Simo of two parts. What you just showed was exactly what I meant to say, well, if you monitor your players. But how did you set the parameters for when does somebody get into trouble? That's one part of the question. And when do you have enough data to judge on that?
So the assessment point, Simo, and the data. Could you follow that?
In terms of data, I'll start with that. It depends. I mean, with data science, the more data you have, the better it is. We've worked with 6 months, typically 6 months plus worth of play data. If you look at the way our algorithms work, they can typically be tuned to start assessing play after, say, 10 or 15 active gambling days worth of data. But the more we have, the better it is. You could use less data, but I think a better KYC approach around affordability and collecting customer data when they sign up is better in the early days. Then you wait to collect the data, and then you can overlay the type of analysis that we do on top of that. But there will be a period of data collection for sure in the Netherlands. You'll have to, you can put in place, for example, some more manual or simplistic measures in the early days whilst you collect the data and sort of slowly build up your capabilities. In terms of the thresholds as to when to detect harm, when you have a sort of population, you have a reasonably large data set with an operator, you'd probably look at things like population guidelines. So if, for example, let's take the UK, let's say one of our customers, we have, some customers with over 1 million registered customers. If they're playing online casino and we have, and the prevalence surveys in the UK suggest that 10% of regular online casino players are problem gamblers, we could use that as a benchmark. So if your population, if you can extrapolate from your player base to the jurisdiction and the vertical, you can begin to say, well, actually, then perhaps it's not unrealistic for me to have a proportion of my player base, 10% of which who are problematic or at risk of being problematic. Then I would use, I guess, you would have some levels of, based on how your system works. Some people would be flagged as higher risk or lower, but I think it's okay to look at segments. So I would look at things like the verticals you're offering, look at the research, look at the population studies, and then see how that applies to your player base. It would be probably unwise in that example to only flag 1% of your player base if the population survey suggests it's 10%. Likewise, if you're flagging 20%, unless you're doing something very different, like just offering very, very high volatile games with no limits and no RG tools, then you've probably got too many. So I would try and triangulate using your data and the research that's available in your jurisdiction and your business practices. So sorry, it's a slightly long-winded answer, but a very hard question to answer as well.
Thank you, Simo. Quite clear. Couple of questions still there. We still have some time. One over to Janny. Will online and land-based responsible gaming policies be integrated? For example, will you use player data that is gathered offline for online responsible gaming purposes, and vice versa?
Yeah, we're still not sure if that will be possible, but I think that if you are playing online with Holland Casino and you're playing land-based in Holland Casino, we are be seen as one company. So we have to use the data integrated also, because we can't say you have a ban for the land-based gaming. Oh, come on, you can play online with us. So it will be very difficult, I think. So we have to integrate the data and the data that's allowed to gather for us.
Great. I guess that also answers question number 2 here. So let's move to the third question here. Francesco, one for you, and I hope you can hear me well. Francesco, if the aim is to prevent public backlash, what is your advice to industry associations? How can they get everyone on board?
So the backlash happened in several countries. So there's an example not to look at. Can you hear me, Willem?
Yes.
Okay. And it happened in Italy, UK, Spain. So something went wrong also on the industry side. So the advice, if I can give an advice, would be for the industry to be more proactive in maybe self-regulating or proposing solutions that are compatible with the political situation of the regulator. Advertising is a good example. There's a self-regulation for advertising in the UK now, but it's too late. It happened when now the backlash has happened already indeed, because of too much ads on TV. So the industry has been usually reactive instead of being proactive. My suggestion would be to try to anticipate the issues instead of complaining afterwards.
Okay, thank you, Francesco. 2 questions left here. So I guess that's for Janny and Francesco, Simo, everybody, also perhaps people in the room here. I think it's...
Yeah, I think that the economic case, if you want to have lifetime value of your players, you need a good responsible gaming policy, because otherwise, the players are very short your customer, I think. So I think it's very important to have responsible gaming, and also because the community asked it for us to have a good policy. The times are changing, and as we see also in the presentations, that also KLM and the Shell and Heineken, they have different campaigns now, and also for our industry, it's very important to keep in connection with the society. So I think that that is economic. Important to have a good responsible gaming policy. And also, I think that's for me the answer also on the question
the economic
when
case is a long-term
why we are together with
case. In the short
Playtech.
term.
Together we were having the license, of course, but it's a Dutch license, and it's a Dutch license also in connection with Holland Casino. So, and I think we're good partners in this.
Yeah, and I guess it's also embedded in the industry and the new regulation, of course. We have a question here coming on the screen. Do you know how are customers thinking about sharing information about their gambling behavior? Of course, privacy. So I think Simo, you shared that briefly before. Maybe you can elaborate.
In some jurisdictions, it's seen okay. The good example is in Ontario, where we work with the state monopoly, supported their online casino and lottery. There, for many years, the population are quite comfortable with sharing data and expect the operator to have high levels of consumer protection. They've actually interviewed and done a lot of market research. I think in the UK, there's a generation where it's normal to share data. The younger generation, the digital first generation. I think the older generation, a lot of them who still gamble in retail and land-based casinos and bookmakers probably don't share that comfort. So I think depends on jurisdictions, depends on subpopulations in countries as well. But there is, as mentioned earlier, I think there's a little bit of a backlash now. People are beginning to understand that Facebook, Google, Apple, Amazon, etc., can influence their day-to-day decisions. So I'd expect this to be a hot topic in the next few years.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe we should ask this question again when remote gaming has opened in the Netherlands. Yeah. Maybe there's time for one last question, either from Slido or he from the room. In that case, I would like to thank the panel, Simo, Janny, and Francesco for your participation today. Thank you very much.
Bye.